Hello, and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast number 1863. The topic is nutrition, and the title is What to Do When You Have a Bad Day. Well, with holidays coming up here in America, we celebrated Thanksgiving, which is a day we eat a lot of food, typically. And we also have coming up, Christmas and New Year's, and usually the time after Halloween, when we get into holidays such as Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, there's a lot of travel, there's a lot of inconsistency, and that can lead to people going off plan on their nutrition. Although, there are many other reasons that can happen as well. We might have a time or a moment or a season of high stress. Maybe something happened to you and your response is overeating or undereating in regards to stress. There could be a lot of reasons, whether it's, events, whether it's things internally, externally, that cause us to go off of our program, that cause us to miss the mark, so to speak, for our targets. What do we do? How do we, quote unquote, fix that? How do we correct that? How do we adjust for that? Well, there's two things that I want to point out that we absolutely should not do. These are 100% the things that everyone does that I have to tell them not to do. And whenever they don't do it, things go a lot better than when they do it. So we do not want to do these things. The first thing is we don't want to overcompensate. Typically, when people overeat, they respond by undereating. When people undereat, they don't actually typically respond by overeating, but they try to think, can I do anything? Can I do anything? Can I do anything? And the response we want to have would be almost like having no response. What I mean by this is we made podcast 1615, which was a nutrition podcast titled Why Are You Overweight? Inconsistent Eating versus Overeating. You can find that podcast on our website, www.brutalirongym.com. On the bottom of the page, we have a podcast player. You can select whatever episode you want out of the last 300 episodes. And then under the podcast player, we have instructions on how to find older episodes. But podcast 1615, we talk about the reason why people have higher body fat percentage than what they would like is typically because of inconsistent eating, not overeating. If you talk to most people who would say that they have a higher body fat percentage than they like, they're going to say that they eat healthy, or they definitely put in some thought to what they eat most of the time. So it's not like they're just waking up every day and saying, screw it, and eating, fast food and Kentucky Fried Chicken and drinking 2 liters of soda. They're not just waking up with an agenda to eat like crap. What people do is they overeat at times, they undereat at times, and that inconsistency of caloric intake is 100% the reason why our body developed the ability to store body fat. What body fat is a direct response to inconsistent food. So being inconsistent is why we have body fat, not just chronically overeating. This means then that when we think about what we want to do to correct a day of overeating, we don't want to overcompensate by undereating. We're just creating more inconsistency. If I'm undereating, I don't want to compensate by trying to eat a huge meal or going out to eat and saying, well, I'm getting a 2,000 calorie meal in because I missed my calories yesterday. No, we don't correct things by overcorrecting. We don't want to compound the problem. Where I grew up in Pennsylvania, I grew up in kind of the middle of nowhere, and on the edges of the roads in certain areas, there would be this little drop-off. I think we would call it a berm. I don't even know if that's where I grew up, I don't even know if any of the words we used were real. But we called it a berm, And if you were driving and say your tire, outside edge tire, like fell off the berm, like it dropped off the road, the literal worst thing you could do would be to swerve to try to get back onto the road. That would cause your car to flip, basically, so a death roll. So the worst possible thing you could do when you swerved off the path would be try to correct aggressively back onto the path. The best thing was to just let your car slowly coast to a slower speed to where you could actually turn back onto the road at a much slower speed with much more control, where it wasn't so aggressive and it wasn't such a hard swing. So the best way to get back on track, the fastest way to correct an inconsistency, is to become consistent. We just want to go back to what we should be doing. So if I overeat one day, I just go back the next day and aim for my normal calorie targets. If I undereat one day, I just go back the next day and aim for my normal calorie targets. The goal isn't to do anything in response. We just want to get back on track. The second thing that people do that they should not do is they beat the crap out of themselves. They tell themselves they're, a loser and this is why you're a failure and you're such a piece of crap. And we say all these lovely things to ourselves. But we shouldn't beat ourselves up. If you've been in a deficit, say you've been in a caloric deficit, and you eat a little extra food, it's not the worst thing in the world. It's not like 100% of that food goes to body fat. Some of it is going to go towards general repairs that have not been done because you've been in a caloric deficit. Some of it is going to go to muscle tissue repair and actually muscle growth if you've been lifting weights. Some of it goes to glycogen stores. We have the capacity within our muscle to store carbohydrates as an energy source that's available in our muscle. It's like a gas tank for your muscle. Glycogen stores would be filled up to some degree before you would create fat storage. And it helps to, quote unquote, rev up the metabolism. There is a lot of terminology that people would get in a fuss over, but in general, the rate in which our body burns through our food can change over time. Our body can actually downgrade the amount of calories that it allocates to certain tasks, which then would be considered slowing your metabolism. There was an interesting study done on people who did major diets, like the Biggest Loser type diets. And what they found was even 6 years after the competition, 6 years after going through that process, that the majority of them were still struggling with a impaired metabolism. They found that even 6 years later that they couldn't eat the normal caloric amount for other people of their body fat percentage and body weight. So if they were 160 pounds, let's say 200 pounds at 25% body fat, they weren't able to eat as much food as somebody else who was 200 pounds and 25% body fat. They would actually gain body fat. They would gain fat from it. So the aggressive nature of their major crazy diets where they're in these huge deficits, they do all this cardio, and they might do that for 6 months, it can mess them up for 6 years. That is crazy. This is also why a lot of people use caloric cycling in diets. So that way you just don't have a chronically low amount of caloric intake, which starts to slow your metabolism. You would have 1 or 2 days a week where you're actually at maintenance level calories or even a smidge over on purpose. So that way your metabolism stays at the upper level. And you can take advantage of these repair concepts so you don't get chronic strains and joint issues. So having 1 or 2 days a week where you're at maintenance or slightly above is actually a dietary strategy. So don't beat yourself up if you've been supposed to be in a deficit, but you had some extra food. Now, if you've been in a deficit, but you undereat, that's actually worse than overeating because you're holding back your body from something it was already needing. But one of the benefits that you can think of, one of the positive aspects you can think of is it can actually help spark your hunger. You're going to likely be more hungry the next day. In response, don't overeat. Just say, hey, this is pretty cool. I'm actually kind of hungry for the food today. Let me eat what I'm supposed to eat, or at least closer to it. And then I'll keep a little bit of that hunger for the next day, and the next day, and the next day. It's almost like you want to drag that hunger out. So if you have one day where you eat nothing, and then you wake up the next day and you're starved, don't overeat. Eat where you should, and then take a little more of that hungriness into the following day and then the following day. It'll actually help you better be able to eat even when you're stressed on future days. Now, if you've been eating at maintenance or in a slight surplus in order to grow or get stronger, and you overeat, don't worry, you're still going to get the general and muscle repairs of the body. You're still going to get muscle growth. You're actually going to get a little bit of CNS recovery, and it gives you extra motivation saying, okay, next time I'm in the gym, I know I'm fully fueled. I got glycogen stores maxed out. I'm feeling good. Let me go crush some weights. Let me go crush this. If you've been eating at maintenance or in a slight surplus in order to grow and get stronger, and you undereat, bummer. You're going to miss a little bit of muscle growth. You're going to miss a little bit of strength adaptation. We're going to miss a little bit. However, you get a little bit of fat loss, so maybe that was good to help kind of double check your body fat increase. You get decreased gut stress if you didn't eat as much, so you gave your intestines a little bit of a break. And maybe you'll drop some water retention. So maybe you'd been feeling kind of fluffy, and you'll drop a little bit of water retention. So that could be okay. There's a phrase called the silver lining, which is when something bad happens, you try to look for a good component within it. So you look for the silver lining. We have podcast 1527, which is sliver linings, which is a phrase I use with Meredith all the time because sometimes bad stuff happens and it's pretty much all bad. So when we try to look for something good, I'll usually acknowledge that when I state something that's good, I'm fully aware that this is so small of a detail that it's almost insulting if I were to try to take it serious. So I call it a sliver lining, meaning I'm joking that I know this is such a small good thing that it doesn't negate the bad stuff, but I still want to say something good, so we call it a sliver lining. So when you have a bad day, when you go off track, don't look at the bad. Instead, look for the good. Look for the sliver lining. And make sure that your response is not a response. Just get back on track. Remember that consistency achieves goals. So don't do another off-plan action to try to correct going off-plan. 2 off plans don't make a plan. 2 wrongs don't make it right, right? So don't add to the inconsistency. Instead, get back on track with the plan, with the program, to regain consistency. Okay, so that's what we do when you have a bad day. Don't overcompensate and don't beat yourself up. Just get back on track and keep plowing forward. If you have any questions, if you need anything, let me know. My email is brutalirongym@gmail.com. If you want to set up a free 15-minute consultation, we are offering those right now. You can just shoot me an email, or you can go to our website, www.brutalirongym.com, go to the one-on-one services page, and you can sign up for a free 15-minute consultation. I just want to see your face, talk to you, learn what your goals are, learn what your struggles are, and then we can talk about how to overcome those. Okay. If you like the podcast, please share the podcast. If you like the podcast, please consider donating to support the podcast, which you can do on our website. Also, if you like the information we share in the podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels. You can find us and follow us on Instagram and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.